Hi everyone, it's John Mitchell, and in today's video, we're going to continue looking at areas of workplace relations and specifically look at ways in which employee wages and conditions of employment are determined. And so, the two main methods of doing this that are in our study design are what are called awards and agreements. So, when an employee begins in a business, will they receive some form of payment as well as other entitlements and conditions of work, such as how many hours they need to work, what duties they need to perform, how much leave they're actually able to access, things like annual leave, sick leave, parental leave, and a whole range of other different entitlements. And providing these things is what can help attract and retain quality employees because the labour market can often be very competitive. So, offering an attractive package can help meet these staffing needs. Now, there are a few different ways of determining the pay, entitlements, and other conditions of work for employees. And they include the national minimum wage and national employment standards. And we also have awards, enterprise agreements, as well as individual employment contracts. So let's firstly look at the minimum wage and national employment standards. Now, it's important to note that these are not part of our study design, so there's no need to know what the current rate of the minimum wage is or what the national employment standards are. However, I think it's important to at least address them in this video because they do form the basis of the basic protections for all Australian workers, and then the agreements that follow really work off that. So in Australia, we have a safety net for all employees, and no employee can legally receive wages or conditions below those minimums. And the minimums are set out in the minimum wage, which outlines the minimum an employee can actually be paid, as well as the national employment standards. And there are 11 standards, and they set out the minimum conditions that an employee can receive. Now, on the right are the categories that are in the national employment standards. For example, it covers the minimum annual leave an employee can receive, as well as the maximum hours an employee can be asked to work, as well as all the other categories that are there. And the minimum wage and national employment standards are set by the Fair Work Commission and reviewed annually to determine if they're keeping up with inflation and the cost of living. And the Fair Work Commission will make adjustments if they feel necessary. So, in this blue circle represents the minimum wage and national employment standards, which is covering all Australians. And we're going to continue to build on this graphic as we go through the different ways of determining wages and conditions. Next, we have awards, and awards set the minimum wages and conditions of employment for those in a particular industry. So, in Australia, there are many different industries, and for many of these industries, there is an award that sets out the minimum wages and conditions for the employees that are in that industry or working in that industry. For example, there's a fast food award, there's an air pilots award, a nurses award, and there's more than 100 other awards that are out there. And these set the minimum wages and conditions for those that are working in those particular industries. And again, employees that work in an industry where there is an award are unable to legally receive wages or conditions below those that are outlined in that industry award. And again, the Fair Work Commission also sets the wages and conditions in the award, and they're reviewed normally every 4 years or so. So if we look at our diagram, we have the minimum wage and national employment standards, which are covering and providing a safety net for all Australians. But now we also have these awards for many different industries. So if you work in a particular industry where there is an award, the award would be what determines your wages and conditions of employment. However, if you're working in an industry where there isn't an award, then you would fall to the minimum wage and national employment standards, and they would provide the wage and conditions that you receive. Now, one of the benefits of using an award is that because the business is simply offering the minimum requirements, well, it's cheaper for the business to do that. There's also no ability for the business and employees to negotiate the terms of the award because it's set by the Fair Work Commission. And because there's no negotiation at enterprise level, there are fewer disputes often over wages because of this no negotiation. And the overall benefit of the awards being in place is that they actually do provide a safety net for employees in each industry so that the business can't take advantage of the employees by providing pay and conditions below those that are stipulated in the award. However, because the business is only offering the minimums, it may be challenging for them to find and attract and even retain talented employees. And there's also less flexibility for the business to tailor the pay and conditions to suit their needs as well as the needs of their employees because the pay and conditions are set by the Fair Work Commission. And the business may need to implement multiple awards in some instances. For example, a manufacturing business, well, they may have the manufacturing employees on one award, but have the office staff on another award. And so that can pose challenges by trying to meet the conditions of all these different awards within the business. Next, we have agreements, and you may hear the term enterprise agreement or collective agreement, or may even see the letters EBA, which stands for enterprise bargaining agreement. So, this enterprise agreement is an agreement over wages and conditions between the employer and a group of employees. So, it's now a workplace agreement where the terms are met through what we call enterprise bargaining. And enterprise bargaining is the negotiation between the employer and the employees or their respective representatives who may negotiate on their behalf over pay and conditions. So the awards are set by the Fair Work Commission, whereas now an enterprise agreement is where the business and their employees work out what the pay and conditions of employment will be for that business. Now, they go through this process of enterprise bargaining, and once an agreement has been met, and the majority of the employees actually vote yes for the agreement, meaning that the majority are approving of the offer, it's then sent to the Fair Work Commission for approval. So, this is the final level of protection, I guess, for employees. And before the Fair Work Commission approves the agreement, they will look to ensure that both parties have actually agreed to the terms and come to their agreement by bargaining in good faith. So that means that the negotiation process was fair for both parties. And one of the vital elements of this approval is that the Fair Work Commission performs what's known as the better off overall test. And so this is where they determine if the employees would be better off overall on the new agreement than they would be on the industry award. So remember, the award is providing that safety net for employees. They can't go below. And for the agreement to be approved, the employees must be better off on that new agreement than they would be on that industry award. And then there's lots of other different factors that the agreement must meet before the Fair Work Commission gives its approval. And then once approved, it's the role of the human resource manager to implement the elements of the agreement into their workplace. And in some cases, there will be what's called an individual employment contract. So, this is an agreement on wages and conditions between an employer and an individual employee. Now, this agreement still needs to meet the minimum requirements set out in either the minimum wage, national employment standards, industry award, or enterprise agreement, whichever applies to that particular business. So, it's often used for highly paid employees, such as executives who are receiving extremely high pay that goes outside of those stipulated in an enterprise agreement. So if we go back to our graphic in the blue circle, we've got our minimum wage and national employment standards, which are covering all Australians. We then have awards for different industries, which are providing that safety net for employees on wages and conditions if they're working in that industry. Now, we have agreements which are specific to a particular business or to a particular employer. So if you are to work in a business where they have an agreement, it will be that enterprise agreement that determines your wage and conditions of employment. However, if you work in a business where there isn't an enterprise agreement, then your wages and conditions would be determined by the award for that industry in which you work. However, if you work in an industry where there isn't an award, then you would fall to the minimum wage and national employment standards, which are determining your pay and conditions. So, one of the advantages of using an agreement is that it provides a great deal of flexibility, and the wages and conditions can be tailored towards the needs of the employees and the business, as long as they're meeting or exceeding the minimums, obviously. And an agreement can actually have more conditions that are not allowed in an award, and that can help attract and retain high quality employees because the business is able to offer these attractive wages and conditions. And productivity gains that the employees are able to achieve can now be rewarded with higher wages or improved conditions. However, now that an agreement needs to go through the process of negotiation, it's more time consuming and negotiations could even break down. So, when you hear of employees going on strike or taking other forms of industrial action, well, that's often because the negotiations of a new agreement have broken down. And also, it's normally now more expensive for the business because they're now offering wages and conditions that are above the required minimums. So, just to recap, wages and conditions of employment can be determined through either the minimum wage and national employment standards, which are setting that safety net for all employees across Australia, or there are awards which are setting the minimum wages and conditions for those in a particular industry, or we then have agreements which are negotiated through the process of enterprise bargaining and are for either an individual or a group of employees at a particular business. So that brings us to the end of this video. Can't wait to see you in the next video where we're going to finish off outcome 2 and look at workplace disputes. But until then, just remember that for questions, activities, and helping your VCE journey, then come on over to teachingbubble.com.